All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have Somer Hackley, who authored the book Search in Plain Sight, which I read maybe a month ago. And I rarely read a book where I'm like, wow, this is like legit useful stuff. It's not just like one blog post that was turned into a book. It felt like it was very thoroughly researched, and you really kind of peeled back the curtain on what it's like from an executive search partner's point of view. So I'm so glad you agreed to come on to the show, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's really great to be here. And I have the book here. If anyone's looking for it, it's called Search in Plain Sight. You can just type that into Amazon or Audible. I did do the audiobook myself, which took forever. But no, what's funny? Writing a book is so hard. But the first time I wrote it as quickly as possible, like one big blog post, and it was terrible. So it took me 2 years to fix that. So I'm glad that came through because that's what it was initially.
Yeah, it definitely, it felt very well done. And I could see how maybe it started out as like a brain dump, but then like the structure and all the vignettes and all of the details and then references to other sources, like it felt like a legit book.
Yeah.
Which is great. And
Thank you.
the I listened on Audible, so
oh yeah, cool.
I thought the narration was well done as well.
Thank you.
I appreciate kudos to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but yeah, happy to chat about it and chat to your audience about all the inside scoop of executive search and how it all works.
Yeah, love it. Before we jump into that, I'm thinking that probably was way more work than you anticipated when you decided to write the book.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes, it was. Well, the thing is, I wanted it to be good. I could have written a terrible book, and what really kept me going, it wasn't like I wanted to write a book. Honestly, I didn't say, I want to write a book. I can't wait. Let me find the topic to write the book about. It wasn't that. It was talking to executive job seekers every single day, especially right in the beginning. I launched my firm and then COVID happened 3 weeks later. And it wasn't appropriate for me to do business development when COVID was crazy.
Yeah.
And also I was freaking out about COVID personally. Right. So I just decided to check in. How are you? How's COVID? Do you want me to keep you in mind when this is all over, and everything's back to normal? And I was just chatting with folks. And I found that when you're a recruiter and you call someone with no agenda, you're just like, how are you? They have a lot to say, especially about recruiters, recruiting, the whole thing. Lots of questions, and from very senior people, So I found myself just answering all these questions and just feeling tremendous empathy for everyone I was listening to and talking with. And that's why the book came to be. I was like, I just need to get this all out there. It's not a big secret. Like, it just needs to exist for everybody. And so that's why I want it to be good. And that's what took forever. So, yeah.
What a roller coaster ride you've been on, to the extent that you were very successful in established exec search firms. Then you decide to hang your own shingle.
And
then you've got COVID, but then we had the post.
And then it was great. Right? Yeah.
And then now we're kind of in a new phase, which is kind of restructuring, but still a lot of excitement around AI.
Yes.
How's that kind of up and down been for you?
Yeah, it's I would throw in there, I the first thing my head went to is, and I got pregnant and had a baby, so then I was like even more COVID conscious. But then when, he got unleashed into daycare in 2022, it was like all bets are off and at least, things can get back to normal. But I was very pregnant getting this book done, and I put it on Amazon, and then we had our baby a week after the book was published. So I'm glad it was in that order. So yeah, so not only like figuring work out, but figuring out momhood at the same time was very interesting. But I will tell you, a lot of the advice I dish out in the book, a lot of it is because I have to take it myself, and, mindset, confidence, owning your story, surrounding yourself with your fan club, all the things we can talk about. But these are like deep-seated things in my own persona of remind myself of surrounding myself with people who want me to win. Make sure I show up the right way. And like, why, if I don't have confidence, why can I diagnose that and do things that make me confident. And so honestly, a lot of it was kind of great that I was writing this book for job seekers, but a lot of it was also me for starting my own business from scratch, taking my own advice and people cheering me on the same way I'm cheering job seekers on at the same time. So it kind of helped me through all of it.
That comment about confidence really resonates with me because I recently took a continuing studies course at Stanford based on their interpersonal skills dynamics workshop, also known as touchy-feely at the business school. And one of the biggest takeaways was how we interact in teams and in organizations often has roots into how you see yourself. And how you see yourself often has roots into things that you've gone through, sometimes very early in life. And really kind of being at peace with who you are and feeling good about it is kind of the foundation for a lot of confident leadership. So totally hear you there. And I think it comes through, now as a, small angel investor, when I'm meeting with founders, like you just tell within 30 seconds if someone's really grounded and knows who they are and is going to do, great things. And then others who are, still going through their development journey and maybe not quite ready for the big kind of outcome down the road. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about the book. One of the things that struck me was you start the book, or early on in the book, you talk about, hey, sometimes you'll get an email from someone saying, hey, my name's Joe Smith, can you shop me around? And how that's like, no, that's not how we operate. What tell us a little bit more about that misconception and how it really works from the search firm's point of view.
Yeah, I had to start the book there. And when I decided to make the book not one big long blog post of me soapboxing about recruiting, and I went out and did all these other interviews and chatted with other executive recruiters, chatted with, job seekers, chatted with, C-level folks that have really won this whole world. The number one misconception I heard from everyone is that job seekers think that recruiters help them get jobs, when in fact, recruiters are filling positions for the companies that have hired them. Now, it's very confusing. There's lots of asterisks in there. But I will say that recruiters do other things like advisory projects, succession planning, research, all kinds of stuff. Now, the reason that it's confusing is there's different types of recruiters. There's contingency recruiters. There's retained recruiters. It kind of comes down to, I think, if something's free, then you're the product, right? Kind of thing. So, I had a long, thought like process back in the day of like, how do I explain the differences between contingency and retained? And they're just very different from each other. But essentially, the contingency firms in general, a lot of the way I was trained and what I see online is they're pitching candidates. So they are essentially shopping candidates around to get contracts signed with companies. The candidate's the product to open the door, so they'll shop like certain candidates around, but they're not helping everyone get a job. The candidate is more of that door opener. So in retained executive search, that is not the case at all. The company will sit down with the search firm and say, here's what we're looking for. Here's the journey we're going on. Now send us the top 5 people in the world for that role. And so the search firm has to go out and say, not only who's qualified, but who are the top people. And that's a whole other process and a whole other skill set. And it's really up to the search firm to make these determinations with the client. We're meeting every week. We're showing show our work in the background of who we're talking to, what market sentiment is, those sorts of things. But yeah, no, my whole inbox, especially now that the book has taken off, is here's my resume. Here's my resume. Can you help? Do you have anything? Or, hey, can you review my resume? What feedback do you have? Or look at my LinkedIn. And, and it's tricky because as I mentioned before, I wrote the book because like, I really do have empathy for everyone. Like I always am putting myself in everyone else's shoes. I write back to every email that isn't spam, and that's hard. And I try to review resumes when I can. And now that I'm a mom, I'll just multitask it at nighttime, like during, trying to get him to stay in his own bed and stuff like that. But yeah, it's hard. But ultimately, the point is knowing what recruiters do and what they don't do can help job seekers frame the conversation so that when they approach recruiters and they say, hey, here's who I am. It's not, can you review my resume? It's a totally different message. And that's how people can stand out and just stay top of mind.
Yeah. The other thing that struck me about that was that it seemed like a somewhat inefficient process to the extent that, if you're a job seeker and you reach out to an exec search firm, you're kind of hoping that the stars align, that they happen to have an active search right now, and they're looking for someone just like you. And that's sort of, kind of drawing an inside straight. I'm guessing that's just kind of the way the world works. And so job seekers should know, even if they do reach out to exec search firms in the appropriate way, the hit rate's going to be low. Most likely you'll be on their radar for a little while. And then, if something comes up and you're lucky, that's great. But if not, then, you move on. Is that fair?
Yes. And the other thing would be assuming that's the case next week also, because these searches take time. And so in general, I would say the best cadence is check in once a quarter, which I know if you're actively looking, that can seem like an eternity, but it really is the right amount of time to reach back out. And here's the thing though, do it when you're not looking, right? Like keep on reaching out once a quarter forever. And now people for 10 years, and but yeah, I liked your point of like, what are the chances? Now, sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes there's a role I'm looking to fill and the person reaches out and I'm like, I might not have reached out to you because you're a C-level person. This is VP, but you know what, given what you're talking about, this might be interesting. So sometimes that has happened, but in general, it's very rare. So yeah, I would say when you're reaching out, assume the recruiter has nothing that works for you right now, and nothing that you're interested in. So yeah, just framing it about the future is much more effective.
And when you do get those great people that reach out to you, but you're not working on a search right now that matches their, expertise or their vertical or whatever, how are you able to keep them in mind for the future? Or is it really like, well, I hope they remember to reach back out, 6 months from now? Or do you keep like a database and you're able to kind of go back and look at people that you've connected with in the past?
Yeah, it's really hard. But let me tell you how my brain works, because I'm like you. I like how you mentioned like childhood psychology. I'm very into all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go down that route now. But so maybe the way my brain works isn't how everybody's brain works. So I'll tell you what I've seen. I've trained recruiting teams. I've sat on, cube land of big search firms in Manhattan, so I think I have some good perspective. The best way to be lodged in someone's brain is when they want to talk to you. It sounds like really fundamental, but for example, if I reach out and say, hey, Tom, I'm working on this role. Are you interested? Or do you want to chat with me about it? I'd love to just see if it's for you, or maybe someone. A lot of people just say, hey, that's not the right thing for me, but thanks for reaching out. But here's the thing. If you actually spoke with me about it, then I want to talk to you. Now I have you in my brain for this search. Like I legit, like I will look at LinkedIn. I'll be like, I connected with you in 2013. That was your title at that moment. I know exactly what role we talked about. Like I know exactly, because I know what clients I had, because I tend to have clients for years and years, and I help them build orgs, and and then they'll like spark that. And so I'm like matching. So I'd say if a recruiter wants to talk to you, talk to them. And it gives you an opportunity to frame yourself, and say, hey, you know what, maybe that's not the right thing, but think of me in this kind of way. And also I know people for that role you're talking about. So here's some referrals. Now your question was a little bit different. It was like, how do you stand out, or how do you become memorable if you're a cold outreach? I would honestly say you have to be referred to be truly remembered, because I'm again linking you to something that is known. And then you're staying in my brain. So I'm like, oh, okay, I know this person. They're awesome. And they know awesome people. So now you're going to go in that like awesome bucketness of people. Because if no one's vouching for you yet, now I'm just relying on assumptions I'm making about what you've written about yourself and the companies you've worked at. But that's not enough. I definitely will first degree like connect with you on LinkedIn. So that way LinkedIn can remind me who I have met with or who I know. Because anyone first degree, there's a reason they're first degree. But I would say getting referred from a trusted source, especially if it's a client, a placement, like the closer that referral is, the more weight it will carry. If you're like, hey, Somer, my old boss, XYZ, he said he used to work with you to hire folks. And, like that's a strong recommendation.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Now, let's say I totally hear you on the awesome by association bonus. Let's say you get on a call with someone, either through a cold outreach or they get referred to you. That first call, they always say like, well, this is just a get to know you thing. But I think in the book you talk about, well, every call is important.
Yeah.
What are some kind of things that you would want to recommend to people to think about when they're having these kind of very initial calls, how to put the best foot forward and present themselves, as effectively as they can?
Yeah. So a few things. I mentioned Adam Grant a lot in the book because I really respect pretty much everything that he says. I'm just such a big fan of his and his work. He talks a lot about being a giver. So I would say approaching those chats with a giving mindset is it's so rare. It just sets people apart, thinking, hey, what can I give to this recruiter? And even if you're networking in general, like being a giver, like introducing people to other people, hey, maybe you have roles you're working on where I might know people, or hey, I'm happy to share with you some cool industry trends I've been seeing this quarter since I've been looking, the types of companies that are hiring or what's happening with these search processes. Like anything that's market knowledge is a gift. So there's lots of things that you can position yourself as an expert in that recruiters would be like, that is so interesting, huh? That they could sound smart to their clients, right? Or find candidates for their searches. Or if you really, really like the recruiter, maybe you send them leads like, hey, I interviewed for this role. I didn't get it. It wasn't through a recruiter. Maybe you want to try. I've had people do that. So I'd say number one is approaching it with a giving sort of attitude and mindset versus purely taking like, hey, I'm looking. Will you look at my resume? Do you have anything? That's what most people do, which is fine. But I'd say the giving mindset makes people really stand out. Other than that, I would say most people speak about themselves chronologically. I started out here and then I worked here and then I worked there and here I am. And here's what I'm targeting next. And it's hard to be memorable that way. It's great information, but just assume people have your LinkedIn, like they've looked at it, right? Like they see it all. So no need. So what the recruiter's not doing though is they're not drawing correlations of because of all the things, like here's who you are now and here's where you add value to the next place. So people that are like really great at this, they're really great at numbers and lists, and they'll say, look, I've done this 3 times. I've done it in this sort of environment, that sort of environment. And here's how I approach it. And, and really in the book, I talk about think of me when, which is planting seeds for journey matching, because I view recruiting as journey matching, not just title matching or industry matching. It's not just, if it were that easy, right? Anyone could just type in chief product officer, done, right? So it's really around journeys. And so if you get really good at defining the journeys you're good at and saying, look, I'm really good at taking companies from here to here. So think of me when you talk to a company going through this thing, that's what I've done. And here's where I've done it. So I'll pause there. It's a lot, but that's what I say, the giving and the journey matching.
I think the Think of Me framework is really compelling. And I think part of it is because, number one, it requires a level of introspection and honesty about what you really want and what you want to do and what you're great at. And I think the second thing is it requires the candidate to be pretty strategic about saying, because you're effectively saying that means there's other types of things where I'm not the world's best.
Right.
And I think a lot of candidates may be hesitant to kind of narrow their market. But just like product development, you really want to nail your ideal customer profile and nail your critical user journey and be the best at that. And I think similarly for your career, to be able to say like, this is the kind of thing that I was made for. I love it. I've done it before. If something comes up, like, let me know. It sounds like that resonates a lot more than here's my bio.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you're just helping people think of you, right? And the more specific you are, the better, and if you think about anything, like if you come to me and say, look, I'm looking for a job, I'll do anything, I do all of it really well. It's not as memorable as if you say,
Mm,
look, I do this really, really well. And you're very specific with that thing. And then maybe there's another role I'm working on. And I'm like, I don't know if you do this other thing, but let me ask you because you were so confident in the thing you were talking about. So I find that the more confidence you have, the more specific you are, you actually get more opportunities because people
mm.
will ask you about other things and not assume that you don't do them. So you actually end up getting more versus less, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and that's counterintuitive, but
It is,
when you
but I've tried it
describe
out
it, it kind of
myself,
makes sense.
with my own business. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, if I'm more specific, then people will think of me for more. So it's interesting.
Yeah, love it. Let's talk now about, okay, you've talked to the candidate and you like them. You think they might be a good fit. You're going to put them on the short list
Hmm.
or, consideration list. What happens next? Like, how does the next step of the process go where you're, I guess engaging with the client to kind of get their input as well?
Yeah. So I'll try to sum it up briefly, but first and foremost, it comes down to the dynamics between the client and the recruiter, right? So I've worked with so many different companies, so many geographies, so many locations, so many levels and types of people. And so I'd say the best is when it's a true partnership and you have the executive recruiter who's internal, you have the HR business partner, you have the hiring manager, there's all these stakeholders, and we're all chatting together, we're all partners, we're all discussing profiles and calibrating together, versus more of a factory where it's here's a resume, what do you think? Oh, it doesn't have this word on it, so they're a pass. Like that doesn't work.
Mhm.
But I don't want to assume when I'm giving my answer, I don't want to assume that there's a healthy client recruiter relationship. So let's just assume it's healthy and there's a partnership and everyone is on equal footing
Yeah.
and everything's set up very, very well.
Mhm.
And I just have to always disclose things. I've seen so many things. So anyway, so by the point we're at this short list, we've already had some calibration of some candidates. And so in general, the client's like, cool, I appreciate your thoughts on these folks. And I'd love to see all of them because you
Mhm.
understand what we're looking for. And I value your opinion on these candidates. So um, in my mind, the recruiter does have a lot of weight and voice in who the client is ultimately seeing. And also like on the flip side, honestly, pulling people from process if I feel like they're not the right culture fit or something is happening through the process. So um, I do feel the more that the candidate can view the recruiter as an ally and a trusted partner and someone to be honest with and keep them in the loop on their own process and stuff like that, it will do them an advantage because we're all in this together. But after that, then the candidates will interview with the client. We share feedback from both sides. And then it's just a delicate dance of, yes, my role is to help the client hire the best person, but I also want to make sure I'm making the right recommendations and I'm sharing back what the candidates are saying, their interest level, if they have concerns, comp expectations, all sorts of things, and I feel like our role as recruiters is to set expectations and prevent surprises versus just wait and see and kick back and see what happens, and then just like firefight when things fall apart, which is not the situation you want to be in because we're dealing with people. There's going to be something that pops up. It will pop up. Just assume everything is going to pop up. Right. So, so let's just be that trusted person with everyone. So the recruiter is going to ask the candidate a million questions because they're trying to gauge what to share back to the client. And now, the last thing I'll say is once the recruiter has decided to put you forward, because you said we're at that point, right? Like you've
Mhm.
decided to put these candidates forward. Like the recruiter wants you to do well. Like they have endorsed you. They were like, you are one of these, let's say 5 people that are going
Mhm.
forward. So please do well, So like I want you to win. If you don't, I look very bad,
Yeah.
So I'm going to prep you. I'm going to let you know what to expect. I'm going to let you know maybe where other candidates fell short. I'll let you know how many other
Mhm.
candidates are in process. I'll let you know what the interviews look like. Like I'm on your side because I want to look good too, right? So I think realizing that if you are going forward, like yes, like we're in this together, let's do this really well. So that's why I think it's even more important, like if you have things going on, other offers you're getting, questions, concerns around relocation, whatever it may be, just bringing it up so the recruiter can help you bring that up to the client the right way at the right time. because we can help buffer some of these messages. So anyway, it's a lot, but hopefully that'll make sense.
It totally did. I mean, I have a follow-up there where you mentioned, hey, think of the recruiter as an advocate. I think a lot of candidates hesitate and feel like, well, I kind of want to keep my cards close to my vest,
right?
Because the recruiter is going to divulge everything I say. And if I say, well, this is not really a top choice for me, they're not even going to consider me. Or if I tell them it is a top choice, they're going to lowball me on the offer. How do you help candidates think through what appear to be some conflicts?
Yeah. Again, I have all of my asterisks, but not all recruiters are good people. Hopefully most are, right? So I think you do have to use your own judgment and gut feel with the person you're dealing with, right? First and foremost. So I do think if you have a gut feeling about something, it's there for a reason. Don't talk yourself out of it. Go with it. So, because I do know there's different people in this world, like in any industry, like anywhere, right? So you do have to advocate for yourself first and foremost and do what's right for you. Now, that said, recruiters I've worked with have a really long-term, and myself included, have a very long-term view on wanting this to work, meaning the placement to be a great hire and stay, and the compensation to be right, and everything to be smooth, and everyone to be happy, right? So if you have concerns, like for example, years ago, I had a candidate that was scheduled for a final, and he was very concerned about something. This was a long time ago. And he said, look, I'm not ready for this final. I think we should just cancel. I don't think I want this job. And he told me all the concerns, and the company and it's hard to hear that because the company wants this candidate so badly. Right. And so what I did at that point in time was I listened, I reflected, and I went to the client and said, look, we're not going to schedule this final for tomorrow anymore because, he doesn't want to go and it's going to blow up, but let's do this instead. Let's have him talk to the hiring manager again and get to the bottom of this concern. And if they figure it out, cool, then we can schedule the final. And you know what? If this is valid, then let's just move on and we figured it out now. So that's what recruiters can do if we have all the details. And he ended up actually getting the job, being the placement and being great, so just giving me those sorts of details, I can help get to the root of the question, because all it is really like risk mitigation and information gathering on all sides. And it's a big decision. It's a big decision to quit a job, to take a job, to move, all these things. And so, yeah, of course you're going to have some questions. So yeah, but like I said, like you have to, if you think the recruiter is going to say, forget it, like, and maybe you want to just forget it, you'll have to just go with your gut on some of this stuff, but you'll tell who the good recruiters are, who are like working with you to find the right outcome without being pressuring you or pushing you to do something that makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think it does require a recruiter who's playing the long game, because, if they fill this role and you stick around, like the firm's going to get compensated. If this isn't the right role for you and they move you out of contention or they help you navigate to a different thing, they're not going to get paid till that next, role. And so it does require a recruiter who's really playing a long-term view here versus someone that's, just trying to crank out the numbers this month kind of thing.
Yeah. And good work brings good work. This is a reputation business. Placements land and they build teams under them. Companies need other people in other areas, so goodness comes from good work. And, my mission is for everyone to realize that and not be transactional. And there are so many great recruiters out there, and that's how they operate. So I would tell your listeners to trust people, but if they get a weird feeling, then just go with that.
All right, let's proceed now down this journey where candidate, you recommended them, company said, okay, yeah, let's talk to this person. The candidate then goes through the loop. And now maybe it's like a 2 or 3 stage process, and they're kind of like deep into like the end of the second stage, like entering the final lap with a few other shortlisted candidates. What advice do you have for candidates that clearly have passed like a lot of the initial screens, but now, there can only be one? What do you see from candidates that do well in that situation?
Yeah, I know that is hard. I actually, I went through a lot of interview feedback about a year ago because people had asked me this question. They're like, "What makes the hire the hire?" I'm not talking about getting to the first round, matching myself to the role and
Mhm.
having my good stories and done, did that, right? Like who are they hiring? And it's always comes down to the soft stuff, to be honest. And I'd love your take on this too of what you're
Mm.
seeing, but it's likability, it's I wrote a post recently around 2025 and how the theme I'm hearing is just around de-risking yourself and mitigating risk and just being the safe choice. It doesn't mean
Mm.
like you're not transformational. It just means you got this,
Mm.
like you got this, they can hand this to you and you will do the right thing and move the company where it needs to go. And that could be because you were referred in, it could be because you've done it before, it could be just so many reasons you've got this, or just the way you talk about it, your confidence, right? But I do think likability, curiosity, asking questions that you really want to make sure you're set up for success because you've
Mm.
done this before. And so, I'd say more often than not, candidates will have follow-ups with the hiring manager before offer, even though they've already met them, because
Mhm.
they really want to make sure that this is the right thing for them, and they have really good questions. And I think those questions give the client comfort that they're making the right choice because those are really good questions. Thank goodness you're asking these questions. You're thinking about this the right way. So I think at that point it comes down to those sorts of things. And yeah, because you already you have the skills. That's why you made it that far.
Yeah, that's a great insight there, where it's another one of those that may be a little counterintuitive to the extent that if you're asking really good questions that they generally are going to uncover information that will help make sure you're right, but also like you want to know what you're getting into. I think some people may shy away from that because they're like,
Mhm.
well, I don't want the hiring manager to think like I'm not sure if I want to be here, or I'm challenging their plan or whatever. But I think to your point, if I'm on the other side of that receiving the question, I'm like, I'm glad he's asking these things,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he needs to know what he's getting into, and I want to know how he's thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So that makes a ton of sense. And in terms of that final lap thing, a few years ago, I made some pretty senior hires at Google, and we worked with our internal exec search firm. And there were a number of candidates that we really liked for a particular role. And I think we came down to it's like the top three. And honestly, I liked them all.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was a combination of, well, the rest of the people on the loop were a little bit kind of 51-49 on candidate, one versus two. And then maybe candidate one had worked at a firm that was very similar to what we were looking into getting into. But it was really like by a nose. And later on, I got a call from candidate two saying like, hey, what happened? I thought I did really well. And I was like, look, there was nothing you did wrong.
Yeah.
It really was. We just had an incredible, slate. And we only had one role we could fill, and we made it to someone else. But it was a real struggle. So, for folks out there who've made it deep in the process, like at that point, like the top candidates could have done a great job. And then it becomes a lot of the soft stuff, or just like a little bit of
Mhm.
a intuition that makes all the difference. And there's not much you can do about that, like that's just the way it works.
Yeah. For those folks, I would recommend if they can ask, if they have a really close relationship with the recruiter, internal recruiter, whoever it is, if it's a smaller firm like the hiring manager, just ask how many other candidates are scheduled for finals, and when they are, just to give yourself some emotional sanity, while
Mm.
you're waiting, or just so you can know how much weight to put into it when you're talking at dinner, or you're trying to fall asleep, or you're even thinking, should I apply to new roles or not? Because it's one thing if you're like, you're the only one scheduled for final and it's tomorrow, or if I talked to one candidate who said there were 8 candidates like going for a very like for a big like CTO job, like very far along the line round of interviews. I'm like, that is so many people to break
Mm.
through a huge process. But knowing that can help you realize how seriously you should be thinking about this, or should you be filling your funnel elsewhere just in case, and things like that. So I think it's all about just setting your own expectations, because that's what's really hard about all of this.
So let's talk about a related scenario where the candidate is in the final consideration, like they're meeting with maybe a board member or whatever. Like they're deep in this process.
Yeah.
But they know they're not the only one. In the book, you talk about encouraging people to consider asking the recruiter, like, where am I in this stack rank? Like, what's this looking like? And I don't think a lot of candidates would think that that's okay to ask. When you get that question, like, how do you feel about that, and how much are you comfortable divulging?
Yeah, I'm okay with them asking. I think as long as it's okay with your personality, if you feel weird asking, it's going to come out really weird, because you're going to be like, I shouldn't ask you this, but like, here's a question that I think I should ask you. Like, you have to just be honest with them while you're asking. Just be like, hey, look, I really want this thing. And, I just want to know like the reality of this coming to fruition, and where do I stand? Like, if you're just, honest with folks, you'll get honesty back. If I know that if things go well, as long as this person is not like inappropriate or something, if things go well, like they will make you an offer, I will tell the person, because I want them to go into that conversation mentally prepared of like, okay, if things go well, I get an offer. And I need to ask that. It's a different conversation if you think that way. You're like, I need to ask the things of this board member. This is my chance to ask the board member these things, versus interviewing, right? Now, if candidates have huge egos and they show up like, I got this thing, and they're just kicked back and not really preparing, or just showing up, as it's done, like that won't go over well. But I rarely honestly have candidates that I put forward that are like just low EQ and just like so like that, because I don't work with companies where that would be a great quality trait. So I find it's fine to tell people that, and I like telling people if they're in the top 3, or if they're top 2, at least, so then they know how to gauge things. I tend to give a lot of information to help people out.
Related thing I've heard, and I was curious to get your input on this one. I've heard that if you're going through a retained search and you are one of the top candidates, that recruiter is going to be following up with you constantly. And conversely, if you're going through a search and you haven't heard from them, you did an interview with the hiring manager on Tuesday, and it's like Thursday, Friday, you still haven't heard. That's generally not an awesome sign. Is that a fair, kind of rubric to think about, which is like the follow through and follow up from the recruiter is a good indication of how high you are in the consideration list and how quickly you're moving through?
I think you need to pay attention to if it's changed dramatically. If this recruiter is the kind of person that you're always chasing, because they're always traveling, or, who knows what's happening, or they're just not on top of their email or text, like, then that's consistent with their personality. I would probably change your time frame from like a Tuesday to a Thursday to if like 2 weeks pass. Like with startups, like they move fast, and certain companies move fast. They give feedback same day. They are moving. They are scheduling next rounds next day. Other companies, they'll schedule, like they'll do a loop where they have 8 people. They don't share feedback in between. And then they schedule a calibration meeting amongst all the 8 people. Maybe it's 6, maybe it's not 8, but they'll schedule a calibration meeting where they all share feedback because they don't want to bias each other by sharing it in advance in writing. And so to get that meeting scheduled, hopefully they've already scheduled it, but that might take a couple days. So, so I wouldn't read into a couple of days. I might read into a couple of weeks, because like, come on. However, I do have a whole chapter in the book about feedback, because it's the biggest pet peeve of everybody, of not getting feedback. And there are many, many other reasons why feedback is not happening. I've seen so many scenarios, like big company things are happening and they just didn't even tell the recruiter, right? So sometimes the
Mm,
recruiter doesn't even know what's going on. Hopefully they do. But there could be other scenarios that have nothing to do with that candidate, right? But it's just other things that they can't share yet. But yeah, if you haven't heard back in a few weeks and you're just like, hi, what's happening? Yeah, like I would I wrote in the book how this one person just gets bold at that point, like, hey, I'm assuming they are moving on,
right.
and and like I just because they just need to like mentally just get it out of their head, and like if that's not your approach and you don't want to walk away, you can just say like just be really honest and just saying like, hey, I'm reading into the silence. I'm thinking I'm a no. Like, just let me know if that's not the case because I'm going to pursue some other things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. All right. Let's say now that you actually made it past the finish line first, and the recruiter's like, hey, great news. They're making you an offer. We'll have some details, in a couple of days, blah, blah, blah. And they ask you again, maybe they asked you in the initial call, but what are your, let's talk about compensation expectations. What is your advice there? Is it you make me an offer, or do you lay it out there? What are the best practices?
Yeah. And then there's lots of opinions and trainings and videos and advice and books and all kinds of stuff on this. So I've done a lot of research myself as well. So keep in mind, my perspective is from the external recruiter search firm point of view and my relationship with the candidate. Now, I love my and when I was thinking of the word like community, job seekers, like all these people in my network. I love all these people because they will send me videos to watch. Be like, what do you think of this advice on compensation? I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah. So like I'm constantly getting my brain going in different directions on all this. So, but I do think if I stick to like my perspective is there's me, there's the candidate, there's the internal recruiter. At a big company, there's a compensation committee, there's a hiring
Mhm.
manager. So there's a lot of different people here. Startups are a different story, right? But let's say I'm trying to make sure that that internal recruiter can go to the hiring manager and the compensation person with a number, with numbers that when we go to the candidate, they'll be accepted. Because for them to go back is really
Mhm.
hard. It's really hard to say, okay, they'll take X. And it's like, oh, a candidate says no. And then they go back to the hiring manager, the comp committee, and they're like, then now they're looking bad, I'm looking bad.
Right.
It's a lot of meetings and chat, and when I set them up, I'm setting them up with here's what it's going to take, and
Right.
then if they come back. So anyway, this is why first phone call we're talking about compensation. Right before like second round interview, we're rediscussing. I take really good notes. Hey, last time we spoke, you said this, still the case, you know we talk about it again and again and again and again. And I'm also very careful to couch everything with all sides of like, I know things will change. I know like you don't really know a lot yet about the role. And you still have to really look up all your unvested equity. You have to understand how
Mhm.
much you'd be walking away from depending on what month it is this year with your year-end cash bonus, depending when that's coming. Like I totally get the complexity, but so let's just keep talking about it. It's like a multi channel conversation. But I'm also doing the same on the hiring manager side. Like, look, their gut reaction was this. I'll share what I'm seeing in the market. Like, here's what I think. Maybe if I think they're underpaid, or what my gut feel is on this stuff. Like, we want it to work for everybody. And like I said before, like preventing surprises and setting expectations. So doing it all the time. So that way the numbers can ebb and flow and evolve and really get more crystallized before that internal recruiter goes to the comp committee or HRBP or hiring manager and gets it all done and signed.
Mm.
So I view it as just this like constant conversation. And that's why I think it's so important that folks know what they want to make. And I know
Yeah.
there's different takes on that, but I really truly believe in anchoring. And I've seen it before, and it's because it's me. I'm on this side of the fence. I want the offer to be good. I want you to stay. If you join and you find out people are making a ton more than you, be very upset. I'm not trying to get you to take it at some strange salary. Like, no, like we're trying to make it work for everybody. And the company's trying to make sure they have parity among all their people too, right? So people tend to really be mature about this stuff. And I find that the more senior the candidate, the more they really know what they want. And it doesn't have to be one number. It could say, look, for a public company or this kind of role, it would be this sort of thing. If it was Series A startup, then it would probably be this kind of thing, right? Like there doesn't have to be a number. So
yeah, love it. Yeah, that's a really important insight that I hadn't thought about, which is if you're the recruiter and you go and the hiring committee or the exec approves some package, and then you go back and the candidate says no, and then she has to go back again. There are probably a lot of scenarios where if you had just put some more cards on the table early, she could have gotten a good first offer, and then you can poke around the edges a little bit after, but then it's much easier than having to like do a big upgrade after they just approved the original comp plan. It is. Right? Yeah.
Yes. And maybe that person doesn't even know the candidate at a bigger company. Maybe it's some comp person. Like, why am I looking at this again? You already said it would be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, now, some people out there who listen to this might think like, well, but if I reveal too much, what if I undersell myself or I'm not being fairly compensated? Now they're going to use that against me and say like, well, you know, Bob's only making very low market, so we can just grab him with barely market.
I feel like good companies don't do that to people. I truly believe it because they know that you'll leave or you'll like they want to pay people fairly. But I think before you interview with your dream company, have other interviews first, reply to those inbound messages where you're like, I don't know, that role's not too great. Interview anyway, you know, just or at least talk to the recruiter, you know, just to gauge, to get some reps on interviewing in your stories, but also understand comp, like make your own data set for you specifically. Like, okay. And then just in like, you know, Sanjeev in the book, he had an Excel spreadsheet of all the different recruiters and different industries and different comp breakdowns. And you know, he just kept it. He had his own data set of telling, you know, figuring out, and he could ask like, what does that role pay? Or he could just throw a number out and see what they said. And if they're like, oh, wow, like you're very expensive, he'd be like, okay. Or if they were like, oh, you're not expensive, he'd be like, noted. Right. So doing that earlier on other roles can be really, really helpful. Also, there's you know, there's different comp surveys that some of these big search firms put out. I'm sure you have some. I can share them with you and some of your listeners after. But if I see them on LinkedIn, like follow like a lot of recruiters on LinkedIn, you'll see they'll publish their placement data. It's super interesting. So at least then people have a data set that they didn't have to come up with on their own.
Totally. What about an alternate scenario where a candidate sees a role, they love the company, they're like, oh man, I'd love to work at that company, but then the role publishes their comp range, and the candidate's like, that's kind of low. Do you recommend that, well, they should move on, or should they go for it and then try and negotiate up, you know, later on? Like how should people think about that salary transparency now that's on a lot of JDs?
I love all of your specific questions. It's like rapid fire. It's great. So what I would say is don't do anything in writing because you can't react. So I think it might be someone's initial gut feeling, be like, what? Let me write to them right now and be like, my comp is like, this is way too low. Or just like, I would not email anything because you need to talk about it. Right. So I would not discount the whole thing. I would go through with the interview, and I would, if they don't bring it up, you bring it up. Be like, hey, guess what? I saw your comp range posted. I'm actually targeting something else. And this is what I've been, you can also say instead of what I'm targeting, you can say I'm interviewing for other roles paying X. So it's a little bit nuanced and more about the market than about what you want. And say, look, is there any flexibility you can get there? And you might be surprised. Like I have been surprised by, you know, companies shifting roles, saying, you know what, we can move these other people under you too, since you're so great. Or companies saying, you know what, in 3 months, we're about to open this other thing. We didn't even post it yet. So let's stay in touch on that thing. And we'll talk about that because we don't want to shoehorn you into this if it's too junior anyway. So I find that bring it up, be upfront. it's better doing that than just waiting and seeing and surprising everyone at the end with information you clearly had already, and then being like, oh no, it's too low, and then it's kind of like the door's closed
Mm-hmm.
versus being more in control of it and creating a narrative for yourself. So I find that things working out really well when people are just upfront.
Okay, this has been a terrific conversation, Somer. I feel like we've complemented the book really well. Let me
Covered so much so fast.
yeah, this has been great. This has been awesome. Let me wrap up with maybe something people don't often talk about, which is, let's say you've negotiated, you get the role, you're at the company now. What is the relationship? Is there any expectation of a relationship after? So now you're in the new role, and I think many of us are like, okay, I'm doing my new job now. Is there best practices on how to kind of continue to engage or keep that kind of relationship going? Obviously, if you're building the team, then you like this
Right.
recruiter, you can work with them and retain them to kind of help you build out your team. What about for your own future, next adventure a few years from now? How do you recommend kind of keeping those lines open?
Yeah. I think this is what's great about text message is it doesn't have to be a whole
Mm.
thing. I think as soon as you can get to text with anybody, get to text, whether it's, hiring managers, internal recruiters, external recruiters, anyone you're networking with, just, hey, what's your cell? Is it cool if we text? And it's just that way you can say, hey, how are you? Just checking in, or, hey, let me know if you want to catch up sometime. It doesn't have to, or happy new year. Happy this, loved your LinkedIn post about that thing. It doesn't have to be this like well-crafted, glorious check-in email, that people like spend too long editing and making shorter. And,
Right.
so people will text me like every 3 months, every 6 months, like forever, and whether they're a candidate, then they're a client, then they're a candidate, then they're a client, and it flip-flops, which is so cool. And you just never know. And so I love it. Just people know like about my son, it doesn't have to just be about work at that point. You kind of get to know people over time. So yeah, that's what I'd
Great
say.
advice, Homer. Anything that I didn't ask you that I should have before we
Oh
wrap
man.
up?
Well, the book is 300 pages. So there's like so much in here. Um, no, I think that is a lot of it. Trying to think if there's anything big. I guess I'll just end it with how we started, which is mindset.
Mm,
And all this stuff is really easy to talk about, but if you're not confident, if you don't show up to the compensation conversation, to an interview with the right mindset, then it's very hard. And I know that's easier said than done, especially if you've been looking, you're applying online, it's going to the black hole, you're a no, you're this and that. It's surround yourself with people that are cheering you on. They will lift you up. They are out there. Maybe you haven't talked to them in 10 years. Who cares? Hey, how are you? Just want to catch up. Like, people love you. Just talk to them. Like, talk though, not just email, like talk to them. And things that are making you have no energy, just stop. Just take a break from that stuff. Like, if it's applying to jobs all day, going crazy, just take a pause. Talk to people instead. Um, and the other thing on mindset is I think um, approaching everything with curiosity can really help ease any kind of jitters, so just really wanting to learn everything and can kind of take the edge off of feeling like you have to impress everyone,
mm.
and so and even when I went out to write this book, I felt like I knew a lot about recruiting, but I approached every single conversation with like, what do you think the biggest question is about this thing, versus me saying I think this, right? So
Hmm.
it's different, and it's kind of cool, the things you can learn along the way, and it just kind of takes the edge off.
I love it. Before I let you go, one last question. What is your read on the state of the market today for senior product leaders in tech? I mean, I've been through lots of ups and downs and seen, the dot-com implosion and then the '08 financial crisis and
Yeah.
then the '23 restructuring. Well, how do you see things going at the moment?
Yeah. Now, and likewise, I started in '02, right after that, and then switched to CT Partners right before Lehman went out of, so it was just all
Hmm.
crazy. Um, It's a big question. I've been asking around. I have my own experiences also. At the end of the day, there are jobs out there. There are. There's a lot more noise out there. There's a lot of news, but outside of news, ChatGPT, resumes, job descriptions, automation, there's just a lot of noise. And so it's hard to cut through the noise. And I think being human can help. And so the people, like I said in the beginning, people are a little more risk averse these days of making the wrong choice and especially pulling the trigger on these big hires. I think the C-level, of course, they're always going to need the C-level, but I'm talking about maybe C-1. And I've been hearing from startups or startup candidates that roles are getting pulled, like VP roles are getting pulled, or maybe they're going more fractional or stuff like that. So I think there's this whole theme of how do we mitigate risk? So if you can, if folks can reflect on, am I viewed as a risk? Why? And how do I talk about that? And how do I de-risk my value prop? Because maybe what you think isn't risky, I would do some soul searching and also just asking around, if people view you personally as a risk for whatever reason, and then just owning it and just giving people the confidence that you're not and why, and kind of changing that narrative a bit. Because I think everyone's just looking for some just calm and just, sure thing path forward. So that would be my 2025 update on the Think of Me When. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a very, very sober, candid view of where things are. And I think it makes a ton of sense. With less headcount and uncertain headcount, you want to make sure whoever you hire is for sure going to deliver. And you're probably less likely to take chances, even if you could potentially get a higher impact outcome. You want to play it kind of down the middle if you're a hiring manager. In many of these cases. So great advice. And thank you again, Somer. The link to your book is in the description below for anybody that's watching. And I read the whole thing, or listened to the whole thing end to end. And it was fantastic. So I strongly recommend it, not just for candidates, but I think it's great for hiring managers who are going to work with search firms as well. So it kind of addresses a lot of audiences.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thanks for having me. This is fun. Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right. You too. Take care.
Take care, Somer.
Bye.
All right. What a cool conversation. I hope you all liked it. I definitely enjoyed Somer's kind of authenticity. And I've not worked with her in the past, but yeah, if I were looking for a search firm to help fill a very senior executive role, I would definitely consider her, partly because I think she is able, as you could tell in the interview, to kind of build trust very quickly. And I could imagine her being able to find win-wins with candidates and companies. But, if you're not in the hiring mode, not looking for a search firm, and you're a job candidate, definitely pick up her book. And I think the three things that I took away from the book, just to kind of reiterate, that I think are the most helpful and that I've shared with some of my career coaching clients is, number one, I think the framework of Think of Me When is a really great way to force yourself to crystallize who you are as a product leader or as a product manager. And requires that introspection, but I think makes your positioning way, way clearer than oh, I'm a generalist, I'm just a really smart athlete. That might be true, but that's not as actionable for a search firm. I think the second thing was Somer's discussion of the importance of a confident mindset. And, people can feel it. If you're feeling good and you feel good about yourself and you're going to make things happen, it comes through the Zoom or it comes through in the face-to-face for sure. And I think the third thing is, if you understand the full process and you understand how there's this huge funnel of candidates for every one tiny role, I think you will not only navigate the process better, but if you're not batting 1,000, you're not going to beat yourself up either, because there are tons and tons of amazing candidates for these top roles, and they can only make one offer at a time. So hopefully this was useful to you. There's a summary of this and all of my interviews on my Substack, firesidepm.substack.com, right down there. And if you need any career coaching, or if you're a company building out your product team and you want kind of some consulting on product management organizations, reach out anytime. All right, let's get back to work. Bye, team.